And now I would like to ask Carla to say a few words. Carla.
Hello. Yes, perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you all. I'd like to take a minute and give you a bit more information about my background, especially for the students in the audience, because it's oftentimes, I think, valuable to hear how people got to where they are. So as Marisa mentioned, I am a doctoral candidate at UC Berkeley, and I work on renewable energy, economics, and policy. I actually started off studying history. I was a history major and undergraduate, and also studied environmental science, and was really interested in environmental issues. But I was at an urban university in DC, a predominantly black college, where issues of environmental issues were not at the forefront, and oftentimes students felt they weren't a part of the larger mainstream environmental community. And so I started thinking about, well, what does the environment mean to me and students at my university? And one thing that came up a lot was emissions from power plants and thinking about environmental justice. So that's how I first started entering the space. And then I went to graduate school to study environmental studies and really started thinking about energy. And thinking about energy was somewhat opportunistic. Because I realized that no matter what your political views were, everyone cared about energy. They cared about how much they spent on it. People didn't see so much at that time the connection between energy and the environment. But that's become much more important to us now as we've talked about climate change. After graduate school, I went into investment banking and I worked for Lehman Brothers in their power group, where I worked on the financing of coal plants and gas plants. And that really has shaped a lot of the research I do now, because what I realized from that experience was that corporations do spend a lot of money and time doing environmental compliance. They also spend money and time trying to avoid environmental compliance. But the policies that were in place, for the most part, they followed. And that really left me, one, with a real belief in the potential for policy to influence markets and influence business decisions, as well as made me again appreciate that fundamentally corporations are composed of individuals. And these individuals are the ones that are making decisions, and that there's not necessarily a tension, or there shouldn't be a tension always between what we think of as environmental goals and corporate goals. And so that's how I came to the space I'm in now. So I'm gonna give you a little bit of a perspective on my vision for California's energy future. And specifically, I'm going to focus on what we can do in terms of having cleaner energy from the supply side for electricity and for transportation. And then Kathy, that will dovetail nicely into Kathy's work, where she'll talk about what's happening regarding consumption. So, in summary, my vision for California's energy future, which I think is shared by the other panelists, is that I would like us to have an energy system that provides sufficient enough energy, that's reliable, but also supports healthy communities and is affordable. So when we think about health and affordability, one particular challenge that we're facing as a society, and particularly the energy sector, is climate change. Most of you have heard about climate change, and so I won't get into it in much detail, but I will say that one of the general belief that what's causing global warming is an increase in greenhouse gas emissions. And a lot of greenhouse gas emissions come from the electricity sector and the energy sector. California is responsible for 7.5% of US greenhouse gas emissions. So we play a big role. We're 1.8% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So what California does really does have an effect and will be important in the overall policy that we develop worldwide to address climate change. Particularly the electricity sector of California is responsible for about 25% of California's greenhouse gas emissions. The transportation sector is responsible for about 40%. The percentage which electricity represents on the nationwide in terms of greenhouse gas emissions is actually a lot higher, because in the US, the majority of our electric power comes from coal, about 50%. This is less in California because we have more gas fired. So our predominant source of electricity in California is gas. Next comes coal, because we do import a lot of coal, and both of those have very high levels of emissions. And so in thinking about an energy future where we decarbonize, where we reduce our carbon electricity sector, we have to think about low carbon options. So let's talk about some of the low carbon options that are available and some of the challenges that I see with implementing them. So one of the major policies that California, well, I'll back up and say, California has a suite of policies to address climate change. Some of you may have heard of AB 32, which is, one could see it as a comprehensive policy, but it includes 73 different measures. Some are related to markets specifically, some are more command and control, and I'm just going to talk about a few of those. So one key policy is a renewable portfolio standard. We have legislation now which requires that 20% of our electricity comes from renewables. Currently, there's an executive order that requests that this level be increased to 33% by 2020, and there's currently legislation being written about that now. So, can someone guess what percentage of our energy, electricity, actually comes from renewables that qualify for the RPS? So we're trying to get to 33%. Anyone throw out a number about where we are now? What, 5 or 5? That's too low. Price is right, get it higher.
14.
Yeah, that's getting closer. You know, depending on who you ask, it's anywhere from like 11 to 13%. So we're talking about going 3 times the amount of renewable electricity we have by 2020. That's not very far away. And I particularly work on solar, and what I find really fascinating is that we talk about solar electricity a lot, but it actually represents an incredibly small portion of the renewable energy we have now. It's 2% of the eligible renewables we have in California, which means it's about 0.25% of total electricity generation in California. That's not that much. When we're talking about getting to 1% of energy coming from solar nationwide, that's 2 to 3 times the amount of solar we have now. So first, when I think about renewables, there's a couple of things. One, which renewables are we going to use? Because they're a variety and they all have their pros and cons. The main ones you hear about are wind and solar, but actually we get 40-something% of our renewables from geothermal, and there's still potential for geothermal, but less so. We get a significant portion from hydropower, but again, there's less potential for hydropower. And so we are thinking more about what wind, solar, and biomass can do.